And do you guys want to start maybe like 301, 302 to give anybody else a chance to join?
Sure.
Absolutely.
And Troy, I can see us, but we're not, this isn't what they see yet.
Well, welcome everyone as you gather. We're going to wait for a few minutes to get people to arrive, but welcome. So yes, as you speak, your video will be seen, but mainly what everyone is seeing as you come in is the slideshow at the moment with a little square video up in the corner.
And so Troy, we'll give everybody a couple minutes to join here and then kick it off.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Troy, are we live?
We are live and attendees are coming in, so I think it is a good time to start.
All right, very good. Well, want to welcome everyone. This is Bryson Duck. I'm the industry director for TriNet, and we provide small and medium-sized businesses full-service HR tailored by industry. If you have any questions afterwards about the avalanche of changes happening with the recent tax legislation reform, we can certainly help. This includes the Families First Coronavirus Act, the CARES Act, the Paychecks Protection Program, as well as the Employee Retention Tax Credit and tax deferrals, all related to the pandemic. We want to make sure that you get all the relief that you are entitled to. And I know that it can't help everyone. It can be very overwhelming and time consuming. So happy to assist with that. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dean Hyers and Troy Parkinson of SagePresence. I've had the privilege of attending live presentations and webinars by SagePresence, and I can assure you, you're in for a treat today. We've been getting great feedback from all of our attendees for their webinars. Dean is the co-author of Winning AEC Interviews, and today's call with SagePresence is on Confident Presence for Virtual AEC Project Interviews. With that, I will turn it over to SagePresence.
Thank you so much, Bryson. My name is Troy Parkinson. I'm with SagePresence as well. I'm going to help moderate today's session. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you do have questions at any point, we'd love for this to be a real interactive session. So please feel free to use your Q&A box to plug your questions in, or use the chat window, and we'll toss it over to Dean now. And Dean, you can take it away.
All right. It's so great to be here. It's such an interesting time where people used to say, so how's it going in St. Paul? Now they're saying, how's it going in your house? The whole idea that our home has become the place for business is really throwing a wrench at a lot of things that have been somewhat standard, like the AEC interview. Now, we're going to be basing this conversation off your questions. So in a very short time, I want to ask you, let's hear, what do you want to know from a person who has been more or less back-to-back for 4 weeks now in virtual interview prep? That's what I've been doing. It's been 20 years of interview prep, but it's been 4 intense weeks. I think the teams I've worked with are about, I think we're 5-1. So we've been winning more than we've been losing, but it's a whole new ball game. Now, while you think about what questions you have, what I want to just take a moment, stop, and let's recognize TriNet here. They have gone out of their way to bring value to you by teaming up with people like me and companies like SagePresence to bring value to you because they care about their customers. And so they asked me not to say anything, but I do want to say just that. Recognize TriNet for bringing me in, and we appreciate that opportunity as well here at SagePresence. And so let's think about the way the world changed when all of a sudden, where a team, a selection committee is going to judge a team based on what they're like, the synergy between them, the chemistry, their messages, and suddenly we're all separated. They're separated, we're separated. It's hard to read each other's cues. You don't know how to come across as a team. There's just so many questions in adapting to this new format. And I would like to share anything I can to help you based on what you're finding, what questions that you have. A lot of this is similar to the Zoom meetings that you're all doing, whether it's Zoom or Teams or WebEx or Google Hangouts. I know I'm forgetting a couple. There's Blue Jeans. There's all these formats. And suddenly a million questions. So I guess that's my setup. I've been dealing with this for quite a bit. Actually, last thing, Troy's already got his first question, I can see. I was coaching an interview since 8 this morning. And so I'm actually fresh off an interview prep and they're off doing their interview. So how can I help? What do you want to know from me?
Well, right off the bat, Dean, why don't we jump into the technology itself? You had mentioned a few of the platforms, but a big question that we often get is, what do you recommend and what are selection committee members using for these virtual interviews?
All right, so that's a dicey question. And first I want to position myself. I'm not that software tech kind of producer, and SagePresence doesn't officially want to recommend an application. I'll still do it, but understand there's not only are we not the best to answer those questions, it's now a changing industry. Each of these companies, Zoom is talking to architects right now, and they're trying to figure out, what do you need? All the companies, so it's going to be a morphing platform over the next year, and we're going to see some new platforms coming out that are more specifically designed for the virtual interview or the virtual sales pitch. That said, we tend to be leaning towards Zoom, mostly because most of our AEC customers have been using Zoom. And they're testing it and telling us, it seems more stable. We were going to do an interview where our client wanted to do WebEx, and we were having so much trouble with it that we switched to Zoom. So we've had pretty good luck with Zoom. Skype. Skype is another one. They have some good features. They've got a background blur that's kind of cool, but we've heard some people complaining about the stuttering effect. And so from a platform standpoint, we tend to be leaning towards Zoom. And then guess what? It doesn't matter when the client wants to go with something else. There have been a bunch of times, team that I was working on who wanted to go with Zoom, client wanted to go with Teams. So guess what? You go with Teams. So you're going to have to get used to all the platforms. Just they're all somewhat similar, but learn the nuances and learn what features are in which, and you want to be ready to leap to the selection committee's choice, because they're probably going to want to control it.
We'll come back to the selection committee insights in a little bit, but let's first talk about the dynamic of presenting yourself on this new platform, on this camera. how should your framing be? What should your lighting be? Should you use virtual backgrounds? Can you share a little bit about the best practices for being on camera?
Yes, it's a relatively limited set of options at this point. You're going to have a shot like this. You know, you might be closer, you might be farther. What I tend to do is I don't really like being in my house, to be honest, but I like the idea that a background's going to be somewhat simple, but not just a flat wall. So I've got a little bit of decor here to try to make it an attractive background. So my first advice is spend a little time looking at what's behind you. And I've been on Zoom calls where somebody's got a closet open and you see all the hangers, and it's like, whoa, did you not look at what's behind you? So you got to pay attention to that. Another thing that you want to pay attention to is if there is stuff behind you. In film, we used to always talk about, is something growing out of your head? So like, if I had positioned myself here, look at this plant is growing out of my head. That's absurd. So you want to kind of set up a balance that feels right and probably doesn't say too much personal. Like, I'm not in my kitchen, but my kitchen is right over there. So take me farther, Troy. What else would you talked about lighting?
Lighting and virtual backgrounds. What's the recommendation you've heard on virtual backgrounds?
So I'm going to give you my recommendation on virtual backgrounds, which is I don't like them. And the reason I don't like them is they don't work well enough. Now, it also depends on your head shape. So I have an oval, I've got ears and my hair's up here. And what happens when I'm on a virtual background is my hair disappears, reappears, disappears, reappears. My ears go away and come back. Now, some people are really round and like if I put on a hat, it's better. But it doesn't look right. And there's aliasing around the edges. And if you move your hand, your fingers will disappear. Just give that technology a little while. I don't think it's good enough yet. It can be okay, but we were testing it out. And what we're going to be we're testing out next week is we're printing out backgrounds that would be great virtual backgrounds. And we're literally going to put them behind us. So that way, Troy and Pete and Joanna, any of our SagePresence people can have a similar background. So I'm not a big fan of virtual backgrounds at all. I am a fan of lighting, and I'm not going to bring in a studio light kit. I have got a light on the ceiling, and I made sure it's not above or behind me. It's in front of me. In film, we used to talk about a key light. And a key light is supposed to represent light coming from the sun. We're most normal looking as human beings when we're lit from above and to an angle, because the sun's usually up in the sky and not directly overhead. And then I have a light right here. It's actually, I have a standing floor lamp that I set on a chair to give me a little fill so this isn't in shadow. And I've got light coming from a window. And so I try to get a balanced, even light and with a little light coming from above. So this is a relatively attractive. I've made a mistake here. I tried to screen it off, but you've got a big glow that's a little burning. I should throw a sheet over that door to dim that down. But most people have the expectations are low as far as lighting goes, but you should pay attention to it because it's part of the image that you're portraying.
When it comes to selection panels and working actually in an interview, knowing that you've done a few over the last number of weeks, are you finding that teams are wearing the same outfits? Are they trying to have the same backgrounds? What's your recommendation for how teams should appear in their virtual interviews?
So the hardest thing is to look like a team at all. I mean, that actually is a problem. We've got everybody in a different environment. Now, Troy, I don't know, what do you think? Do we look like a team? You've got a completely different background, but we're both wearing a jacket. We have a button shirt that's unbuttoned at the top. We have a similar vibe and our settings are somewhat similar. So I like the idea of not being in matchy wardrobe. Unless you're a company that always wears the company polo, you can do that. But selection committee members have told us they want to see who you are. I would dress the way you would if it were a live interview. Definitely go in and be real and try to be similarly dressed would probably be the best. But dress the way you would on on a professional interview. And by the way, go ahead and wear pants, right? You don't have to. You can just have the jacket. But there have been too many times when we've heard of people who just, we put on the top half and then they stand up or something. And, you know, you can get in all sorts of trouble. But dress professional. You'll feel more professional.
Excellent. We're going to take a question from the audience. Someone has raised their hands from the attendees. So Rose, if you're listening, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you're more than welcome to share your question out loud. Rose, can you hear us? Hold on one second. Let me try again. Oh, it may have just been pushing the button by accident. So Rose, your hand is raised, but if you don't have a question, I'm going to lower your hand and we'll keep rolling. Next question, Dean, is about the dynamics of having clear and concise messages. One of the big questions that we often get is, how do I interject when my partner is talking too long? How do we balance the timing when it comes to the interview process?
This is tough, and let me accent the importance of it before I attempt to give an answer to it. We asked different virtual selection committee members what to rank the different factors that are important to them: the visuals, the messages, the team synergy, etc. And the number one factor that they care about is team synergy, which means they want to sense the energy between you all, and you can't see each other very well, and you're all separated. So you don't get those kind of in the room cues that you do. So how do you get to a message that will help us show synergy? Live, the answer is tag teaming. So we bounce back and forth, and that's harder to do virtually. So what I'm going to suggest is a couple of things. You learn to speak in smaller sound bites, and you learn to add pauses in between, and that allows another person to hop in. So Troy, why don't we just demonstrate? Let's keep talking about the subject of how we get to sound biting and tag teaming, but we're going to tag team.
Got it. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're working with a partner is you want to give some subtle clues on how to know when that person wants to come in. So when I'm done talking, sometimes what Dean will do is he'll push himself forward. Isn't that right?
By stepping up, I can kind of visually tell him that I want to talk, and I can do the same thing in reverse. When I'm coming to an end, I might be continuing after a pause, or I might be done. So I've told my team to watch for me to step back. And so when I step back, you'll know that I'm opening the floor.
And when he opens the floor, it's my opportunity to subtly move forward a bit to be able to continue the conversation in a tag team approach. So if we're talking about budget on a particular topic, I can speak for a few beats, and then when I'm done, naturally I step back.
And then I know to come in. So we'll close our little modeling, but you see how we're tag teaming. Now what you're sensing is a couple of things. You're sensing that we're anticipating each other. That implies we care about each other, which implies we like each other. And collectively, this is how you get to synergy. What I discovered this morning, we were in Teams this morning, and the Teams app makes really, really tiny little windows, and you couldn't see the cues. So what we did instead is we did more practicing, which I'd recommend either way. We want to practice figuring out if the two of us are covering, say, site logistics. We're going to practice so that we get more used to when we can hop in and when we can't. But you can also allow some mistakes. This isn't about perfection. Selection committees aren't going to judge you poorly because sometimes in this difficult format, you step on each other. Just have an agreement between you and your tag team partner that when someone pops in and steps over you, just stop. Let them have the floor and be very, very happy when that happens. So don't be frustrated if you didn't get to finish what you had to say. You just have the agreement. We can walk in on each other and we're going to practice together. And, Troy and I did a pretty good job right off the bat.
I'd like to ask a little bit about how your face should be. The uniqueness of this opportunity is that suddenly everybody's on camera. And whereas on an interview experience, people are glancing around, there's an interaction, but here the spotlight's on you. What's your recommendation for how to present your face? How do you make a connection to somebody who's not standing in front of you?
Well, so the Berenstain Bears, when my kids were little, we used to read the Berenstain Bears Bike Lessons book, which was what not to do. And the best way to find out what not to do is just go to any Zoom call and start paying attention to what people are doing. Zoom or any of these mediums tend to make you look a little crabby. So there's a couple of steps in terms of how to create the right presence on camera. And the first is to be happy. And so I'm sure you've heard the term, I won't say it right, it's RBF. I will call that resting crabby face, so I don't have to say the B word. But we look so glum when we're not on. And so what we do is when we're not the ones talking, and sometimes even when we are, our energy comes across disinterested. So I'll just show you, people come across disengaged. They often aren't looking at the camera, they're looking at their screen. They look like they don't care. You have to be happy. I know that's an absurd, magical formula, but if you can bring positiveness, if you can appreciate the selection committee and you can enjoy each other, this is selling. Because what you're selling is the synergy of you're telling people what you're like to work with. But you have to work much harder on being positive in this format than you do in a regular room. Because the same people that I was working with in a room who I thought were super positive, I got in the virtual environment in our interview prep and I thought, wow, these people all seem crabby and disinterested and disengaged. So I think the first step is it's actually an emotional choice to be positive and bring appreciation to your audience. Troy, steer me from there.
Yeah, so then the next question becomes, okay, if you're bringing appreciation, that's great. Do you look at the person down here in the screen? Do you look at where should people be looking during this process?
So I don't like the answer, but I'm going to give you the true answer. You have to look into the lens a lot more. I'm going to tell you how much more in a minute. But what we're finding is that, in an office, how would you feel if somebody's talking to you but not looking at your face? What you get if I'm looking at the lens, or I'm looking at my screen to find out what you're doing, you're seeing this. This is kind of like looking at your chest. And that's not what you want to do. You want to look at someone's face. The best way to make something that stimulates eye contact is to look into the lens. So here's the bad part. I'm going to suggest you look at the lens 90% of the entire interview. You look at the lens when you're listening, you look at the lens when you're talking, and you can glance down. You can take moments to check what the screen information is doing. But this could be a huge, huge edge that you create in an interview, because you've got team number one who looks relatively disengaged and isn't looking into the camera. And then you've got team number two, who's also looking at the screen and they're not showing energy. And then you've got you. And you come in there with your team and we care, you matter, and we're making the closest simulation to eye contact. Now watch, in a year, most computers are going to come out with cameras inside the screen. They're going to hide it in the screen, but that's not how it is right now. So right now, look at the camera and appreciate through the camera. Now, I can't see any of you. In my lower periphery, I can see Troy, but it's kind of a blurry shape. I can see if he moves, but I'm appreciating you. I'm imagining you through that lens, and I just stare at the dot the whole time, and that's how I do it.
The next question that comes in is a question about how do you feel comfortable when there are technical glitches, and should you be using video in something like this? What do you risk if the PowerPoint goes bad or the video goes bad?
Well, I can tell you, I don't feel comfortable when things go wrong. I don't like it at all, and things do go wrong. Things have gone wrong a number of times. What I have to do about that is, and I'm going to give you sort of a double answer. Answer one is my job is to stay positive. I'm not, but selection committee members have told us they're getting tired of people apologizing when something goes wrong. Oh, I'm sorry about the video quality, or I'm sorry we're not getting this person. Don't apologize for it. Apparently that annoys them. And I don't know that I would have thought of that, but that they're saying that somewhat consistently. Now, one project that we actually had everything technologically go wrong and a bunch of videos cut out, the main speaker was on and in and out of the interview, and we got the project. And what we were told is the positiveness that our team showed, things didn't always work. They just kept going. And we practiced enough that people were ready to cover for each other. So if Troy's video went up, I've got your back. And so they were ready, which is back to practice, but they were ready to cover each other. And in the process, they just stayed super positive. But it was one of the key feedbacks that they got. You were so positive when things went wrong that we really liked that. It said a lot about your team. So that's answer one, to stay positive. Answer two to this is, if you're a key content deliverer, if you're one of the main contributors or possibly any of the contributors of the content of an interview, don't be the one running the show. I would think about this more the way a TV news show thinks about it. So note what's happening here. I'm sort of the main content deliverer because I'm the one answering questions. You think I'm running the show? No, I got Troy. Troy's running the show. He's fielding your questions. He's deciding which is the right order, and he's tossing them to me. So when you go into an interview, you might have a new role that you didn't used to have, which we would call a producer. Have someone produce the technology side, run things, field any questions. You may or may not have questions, but you don't want to be the one running the system because you cannot focus on your job of delivering content.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing that I recall from the conversation with the selection committee as well, is that in most situations, this is their first time doing a virtual interview as well. Yeah. And so can you speak to a little bit about collaborating with the selection committee in advance of an interview?
Sure. So you're already used to reaching out to the selection committee, the company who's putting on the interview, and saying, can we get some pictures of the room? How much space? Are you open to us doing it this way or that? You're going to ask more of those questions, because I thought when the virtual interview started happening a lot, I thought that the prospects would be super open to, we want to do it this way. Is that okay? And it has not been our experience. And when we asked selection committee members, they said, nope, we're going to control that. We're going to pick the platform. We want to make it the same. We want to make it fair for everyone. And we don't want someone to have an edge. So they're going to pick stuff. So what that means is the person who's going to be producing your interview, they should be seeing if they can talk to their technical person, find out, are we able to ask you to be in a certain mode? Can we tell you to be in gallery mode? Can we tell you to be in presenter mode? Talk about questions like how comfortable will the selection committee be with setting their own settings? Are they going to be open to chatting in questions to us? And so you want to get as much communication as you can get. The good news is, while the selection committees that we talked to really wanted to control it, they were very interested in creating the best experience possible. So they seemed very open to answering lots of questions. And I'll close with this one, Troy, on this note. Ask for if you can get a technical dry run, the day before or 2 days before. Can we just set it up and just do a dry run? And so this kind of means winning over whoever's running the tech on their side to see if you can just do a test. And you don't want to find out the thing about the password that keeps you from getting into this or that. You don't want to find out about that 15 minutes before the interview.
Are you finding that there is any talk in the industry about whether this is a passing fad, whether virtual is going to be just this thing we have to do for the next few months and then we're not going to have to do it anymore?
That's a good question, because you're right now sort of forced into investing into figuring out this stuff. And I'm going to tell you, all of the indications are that part of what we're used to, the old live interview, is going to return, but this is not going to go away. I think the world is going to be somewhat different in a post-COVID-19 work environment. I mean, in fact, I'm sure you certainly are are aware of this, but architecture is going to change. So, we're getting into architecture conversations about how we will incorporate social distancing into the design, and how does this affect the engineering? How quickly are we moving the airflow, circulating it through a space, and just all sorts of questions. So on top of that, even if it wasn't going to be integrated into our buildings and our design, people are very quickly learning, wow, cost less to not fly them in. Oh, why would we fly that team from San Francisco up here? They can just be virtual. And what's happened is the world has just told itself, this is good enough. So according to the 80-20 rule, it's 80% good enough. So that's good enough. And so I don't want to drive across town. I don't want to fly. So what you're going to see is a lot of continued virtual interviews. You're going to see a return of the live interviews, and then you're going to have hybrids that are halfway in between. So this isn't going away. I wouldn't worry about wasting time. Whatever you put into investing into getting your head and your team and your experience around this format, you're going to be doing this forever.
Are you finding that selection committees in your research and your experience are more critical about the messaging that's coming across? Are they less critical and more forgiving, and because it's the technology? Well, maybe let me rephrase the question. How important are messages and the message during these interviews versus the technical details?
They're paramount. So if the number one selection committee feedback was team synergy is what we so want to see, and since the bar is lower, all you have to do is get a little better at showing team synergy to show that. The second was message. What they're wanting is, they're a little bit worried. I mean, they don't mind if you want to run a video as long as it works, but selection committee members have said most of the people who have tried to step out of the box of just the basic presenting information, showing what we're like and our personalities and our synergy, everything else has been a disadvantage. They've said, usually when somebody shows a video, it ends up stuttering and it ends up creating a problem. You bring up your virtual whiteboard and something goes wrong, and we're not sure whether we should, I don't know if we want to do a poll. What they want to do is hear your messages. So right now, for the next 3 months, I would say the number one goal is to figure out how I can be real for you and share good messages. And so I think the message is more paramount than it was before. And it sort of spills into a subset of that question is, what's our main message? And this has always been true. This was true in live interviews, but I'm just saying it's more true now. You want to be a team that shows up with a point of view. You want to have a core message, a message that all the little messages sit on, because you go into one of these interviews and you talk about chilled beams, and you talk about, MEP, you talk about design, you talk about site logistics. It's like a plethora of stuff. Now you show your expertise because you can talk about that stuff, but for God's sake, what is your point of view? You want to show up with one, and that comes down to the core message. And so the idea that I'm going to show up and in my open, I'm going to establish a point of view. I'm going to go through the project and continue to reflect that point of view. I'm going to have simple messages around all, budget, pre-con, schedule, et cetera, safety. And at the end, I'm going to remind the team of what our point of view is. Because selection committees are telling us, and they have been telling us this before COVID-19, a team that has a point of view it's like a structure to hold all the millions of details that they're going to talk about inside. It's like a package that all the details go in. So message, pretty key.
Can you talk a little bit about how to manage Q&A in this process? How do you prepare yourself and your team to answer the Q&A, and so people aren't stepping on top of each other?
Well, one is allow a little stepping on top of each other, and as long as you're happy, being stepped on isn't the end of the world. And the agreements that we make with ourselves, our own team, is I stop talking when somebody hops in to make it okay. So we talk about that verbally, but it gets to a new level when you don't get to, you can't huddle with the prospect. So when it comes to Q&A, there's a couple things that are important that we're learning. We've spent some time talking to instructional designers who do web-based training. Now that's, if I'm not coaching an interview, I'm doing virtual training. So of course we get our consultants in to learn from them. And something that they told us was that people need to be told in advance of Q&A. So for example, you'll notice, well, maybe you'll remember when I started, I said, hey, this is going to be like a Q&A. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to start taking your questions. So be ready with your questions and send them our way. And so then questions started coming in. So you want to instruct that. So what we're doing in interviews is we're telling them a little bit in advance of when we're going to ask questions. And we're trying to pull the Q&A into the presentation. We're more interested in that. We always were interested in that, but we're even more interested in doing that. So you might let people know, so we're going to go as far as the budget section, and then, I'd love to hear questions about budget. And then so be thinking as you go, and when you get there, maybe you say, so before we move on, what questions are there on budget? Let's take a few right now. So in general, I'm hoping to create more interaction with them, to create cross entity synergy and some chemistry with them. But I'm going to have to tell them that in advance. So then when I go to ask for questions, you can't just say, so are there any questions about budget? Because one of the possible answers to that is no. You get crickets when you say that. You have to assume them to be there. And you have to say, so we'd like to take your questions now. What are the most burning questions you have about the subject we just talked about? What's burning out there? We really want to hear 2 or 3 from you. Now that's more likely to get questions than, anybody have any questions? Crickets. So you want to be direct about it. You want to own the process of pulling it. And if you can, don't wait to the end of your presentation. You may have to, but if you can avoid it, get some of it to go as the interview progresses. And that way you're getting more comfort and more, cross-company information. Is that helpful, Troy?
Yes, yeah. Well, another question about that interactivity is this question that comes in regarding sitting or standing. Should we be standing during this? You and I are standing when we talk, but should the selection committee, should the people interviewing be sitting as a team? Should they be standing?
I don't want to give one answer to that question. I want to leave it open, but my preference is standing. So let me talk about a couple aspects of it. One thing that's absolutely important is whether sitting or standing, make sure everybody's the same. So you want all of us. So Troy and I are showing ourselves as a team partially by the fact that we're both standing. Our backgrounds are somewhat similar. We're not in the same color temperature, but we're both lit somewhat similarly. So you all want to be the same. The advantage to sitting is it creates kind of a working session feel, like we're in the job. The advantage to standing is it pays more respect and it shows more formality. So there's different reasons to pick those. I tend to find myself picking standing. I also get more energy as I stand. I'm less likely to be just trapped in one place. I can move my shoulders, I can move my hands, and you feel it, I'm like a bobber, the way I work as a person, it's fortunately subtler than that, but you get a little bit of this. And so I like the standing. Now, pushing this a little bit farther, sitting or standing, you want to have people all put the camera on themselves the same way. Our best recommendation is cameras, straight on. It's not lower looking up your nose. It's not above you making you look small. It's as square as possible. So notice if I back up, I'm still more or less in the same place of the frame. I can do the equivalent of a close-up. I can back up to a fair degree. And I have the camera at the height of my mouth. It creates a direct eye contact, but there's a little bit of empowering in the shot because I'm still slightly above the camera, so I look big in the frame. We were seeing somebody who was down, their camera was lower, and they just looked little. It made them look little. So camera at mouth height, camera square if it's if you're sitting on your desk. Mine is sitting on boxes of books. This is my professional system, boxes and books. And I go until I've got it this height. And then I say, Troy, does this seem right? And I make sure his shot looks like mine. Now, I also am paying attention to how big is my head compared to how big Troy's head is in his frame. So I don't want to be up here if he's there, and I don't want to be back here. So we're matching. So these things are the general ones. I like standing. It gives me more energy and more dynamism, but I won't say sitting is wrong.
How about headsets? I've been on Zoom meetings before, and people have headsets on. What's your recommendation when it comes to the virtual interviews? Should be people having headsets or microphones?
I'm fine with them. It's okay to use them, and I don't quite like them. If I'm going to use something, the little earpiece, the Apple earbuds, or the one with a string is okay. What I tend to not like so much, is the big can headsets that make you look like a tech. I don't want to look like an audio tech. I don't want to look like a radio show announcer. And so the reason to do that is you get better sound, and the microphones give you better. So this is my microphone off my laptop. I don't think it's good enough, but I'm going to probably get a microphone that I can hang, one of those on the armature that you lift up like the radio people do out of the shot, quicker than I'm going to get a headset. And it's because I want you to see me as a presenter and as a person. I don't want you to see me as an occupation. So that's but it's fine. A lot of people do it, and I'm not going to say it's wrong, but they just kind of look like radio announcers to me.
The next question is about recognizing or feeling that connection to the selection committee member. How do you know that they're paying attention? How do you know that they're even connecting to what you're saying if you can't read their body language the way you normally do in a live environment?
Well, okay, so you don't get to know that in a lot of cases. This is more spooky. It's like right now, I'm not even seeing my audience. First of all, I'm looking at the dot, the lens. And secondly, your pictures aren't, I'm just assuming you out there interested and into it. It's kind of taxing in a way because you have to use your imagination. You have to make the assumption that things are going well. But there is another part of this. You didn't know much anyway. I mean, think about it. The live interview, you might get some cues, but they're like so stoic anyway. So what we would do in live is we really look at them, we really enjoy and appreciate them, and we enjoy and appreciate each other, and we don't care if they give us nods and smiles and happy feedback, because they usually don't. The selection committee is stone-faced because they're, in the live scenario, they don't want to show their body language to anybody else. It doesn't have to do with you. They're worried about what their own, they're the ones in the game, the voting members. You're more like the cards in the card deck. A hand of cards gets delivered and they're playing poker with it. Now, in the virtual interview, this is kind of cool. They're not as under pressure to be stoic. So sometimes you see more in the little windows, but I would largely just assume them interested. This is about what you give, not what you get. What you're going to give is your excitement and your passion and your appreciation. You're showing them that you're excited. That's your job in an interview. It's not about what you get. So I'm just assuming you're loving this, and you may not. You may have criticisms about this webinar. I don't know, but I'm just going to assume I'm going to like you, and I'm going to enjoy you, and I'm going to assume that this is going well. That's not that different from the live interview.
I'm assuming that this is probably a similar response or answer to a question that's come in regarding whether or not these techniques work if there's a security issue and they can't do video and it has to be a telephone interview. what recommendations do you have for people if all they can hear is the voice, and maybe there's materials that have already been pre-sent to them, but they're doing this as a telephone interview?
Well, how many of you have had a sales call, right? How many of you have sold with not being able to see the person? We do a lot business development. We do a lot of phone calls. We do a lot of talking to people. I don't like it as much. I find that frustrating when they won't let us. There have been a few interviews that we have coached where, I haven't done one, my other team members have, where the client won't allow video and they say, we just want to see your PowerPoint and hear your voice. Well, the good news there is, I mean, just listen to voice. Voice has a lot of information in it. And the key is feeling appreciative and positive or happy. They're different things, by the way. Appreciation is the warmth, and happy is bright. So I generally have a default of those two, but appreciation, so that is appreciating you. Listen to my voice change. So I want to bring this, and you can bring a lot of passion and synergy through voice, but I would rather you also get to see my face.
Questions come in here about, how do you decide when less is more? How do you balance content quantity with the time allotted? I mean, if you have a lot to say in a little amount of time, how do you balance it all?
That's easy. Less is more always. I would just start with that. And the trick is, how do we get to less is more? When the RFP was 80 pages, they asked at least 15 questions, each of which has 5 or 10 questions nestled in it. And basically, in order to explore this, we're going to talk about 1,000,000 things. So it's basically an impossible scenario from the start. And this doesn't vary too much live versus the webinar approach. What I would say is, you want to try to think in terms of the simplest story possible to make a point. And the simplest story is a main character, a beginning and a middle and an end. And so, in other words, the project team is at great risk on this site because it's so small. We're going to leverage prefabrication to take as much of the crew as possible off the site. And that way, your site is going to be very safe and easy to operate. So there, I just did a main character, which is a team, and at risk in a small site, prefabrication is the middle, and the end is now your site is safe. When we've been, especially in virtual interviews, we've been trying to make our point very simple right up front at the beginning of each section. So I want to have a story like that for pre-construction or design or schedule, whatever it is, and I want to make my point in the simplest way possible. Then I call it unpacking. Let's unpack that story and talk about as many details as possible. Who's our prefabricator? Which systems can't be prefabricated? We can unpack the details in whatever time's allotted. So imagine a simple format where I'm going to go into my so what story in the first minute and tell you what the point of the section is. Now, my tag team is going to begin, and we're going to cover as much as we can, and then maybe summarize that section, maybe take Q&A, and then move on. But you've got to you don't want to throw out as much as possible and hope they can get your point. You want to give them the point, then unpack as much as you can. And that really helps these interviews because they need more to hang on to informationally. I think they needed it either way, but right now, that's how I would wrangle it. The less is more is the short little story at the beginning. Unpack, and you're done when you're done.
Next question is about this idea of assuming that you get shortlisted for a project tomorrow and you find out that it's going to be a virtual interview. What sort of preparation should you do as a team? How much time should you allow for your interview prep? Or should you just, yeah, I know this, I've been here, I'll just pop on screen and we'll just do it the way we normally do?
Well, the way you normally did it was probably wrong to start with, so I don't know. I think I would put more time into prepping. So the first piece of this is recognize you need to have a strategy for how you're going about your interview. And that's a lot of questions in terms of how much is it PowerPoint? How much do we want bigger video? So like in one I was doing a couple of days ago, there were points we wanted the PowerPoint up, and then the video gets to be a small little window. And then there were points where we wanted to go more to the Hollywood squares, say during Q&A. And we would take down our PowerPoint so the video windows would get bigger. You got to think through all that. Why are you doing it this way? What are you trying to accomplish? And how are you going to strategize your interview? Then you have to develop all your messages, figure out who's talking about what and what's the so what story. What are the details we want to unpack? And third is the delivery, the practice of tag teaming. So I would say those 3 steps still exist: strategy, message design, and delivery. The emphasis I make comes from what selection committee members have told us. If they care more than ever before about synergy, I want to do a lot of practice as I go. I don't want to wait for rehearsal at the end. So Troy, you and I, let's say we were covering, logistics of the site, and we're talking about what we're going to talk. We haven't gotten to rehearsal day. It's the first day, and we've talked about what would be in that section. Hey, let's give it a go. We would then go and try it. So I'd kind of rehearse your way to the rehearsal, as opposed to what you always do is you just talk and talk and talk and discuss and discuss and discuss, and then you rehearse it. I would rehearse as you go. And secondly, what you're rehearsing more than you used to is the tag teaming. I want to make a real natural flow so that I can show synergy. And I want to make sure my messages are clear, and that I'm clear on the difference between our point message and all the different details I want to talk about as I unpack it. So I did for a while now, I would put, for the next 3 to 6 months, put more time in the interview prep and focus specifically on crystal clear messages and knowing what you'll unpack them into, and focus on the team synergy and the practicing of the tag team.
You've touched upon this, but it's a question that comes up often is this idea of, how do you know you've succeeded at the end? How do you know that you hit it out of the park? How do you be confident at the end of an interview, and whether you've done your best?
Well, okay, so let's start with what everybody thinks is the affirmation. The affirmation is that we get the job. On the way out of the door, they come and say, listen, your interview was so great, we're sure you got it. I would change the game, literally in your mind and in your heart, change the game. The way I want to judge my interview is the same way I'm judging this webinar right now. I want to help you. I'm here to do anything I can to help you as the listeners. And at the end of the day, what I'm going to say is, did I do everything I could to help you? And then I'm going to declare it a success if I did. Now, there's no way to avoid the mental thing of judging if the technology worked. And oh gosh, I should have told them this. And oh, wow, I was a little clumsy here or there. It's natural. So other than the fact that I'm judging synergy more than I used to, and that I'm trying to be as crystal as I can, the number one way I judge it is how committed was I to helping you? And in an interview, don't go to an interview to win a project. Go to help your prospect make good decision. And divorce yourself from the idea that them making a decision is picking you. You want them to pick right for them. Go be the best consultant you can. Share everything you can, recommendations, and your goal is they're ready to make that call. Because they're going to make a decision in an hour that's going to affect the next 50 years. That's their issue. So if you go to help them, that's what I would judge. Did we throw ourselves at helping them? And then, then you can go through the other critique on how the synergy and the messages went. But that's my way of thinking it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, as we're getting close to the end of our hour here, I want to toss one final question to you, Dean, and then Bryson will circle back to you here in just a minute. Any final thoughts, any final recap? If you could give any final words of wisdom to our listeners here and the viewers of this webinar, what's that one nugget they should walk away with for bringing confident presence to virtual interviews?
Wow, that's a hard one. It will sort of, and I'm going to give you the right, Troy, to steer me farther if this is just too much of a rehash of the point I've made so many times. This is an emotional venue. Its best function and why we have the camera on us is to show our personality and to show our passion and our care. The most magical ingredient to this format is actually being happy. It's having fun, which is a choice. We often think of life as the result is, and we had fun. We don't always think of fun, the choice. So think about love for a second. We all know what it's like to love someone or to be in love, but there's also loving, the verb, the choice to love someone. This is what I'm talking about here. I want to choose to have fun here. I want to choose to be positive and happy. And I want to choose to care about you through that lens. So if there was one way I would say the most magicest thing that we've got is choose to be happy. And don't forget that when you're not talking. So if I'm still active, I still look at the lens a lot of the time, even when my other colleagues are talking, and I keep the attitude. So on the interview I coached today, there was one woman who was so awesome. No matter, she didn't always know what to say. And sometimes she forgot parts. And there were a couple things that were complex. No matter what she did, it was awesome because her vibe was golden, because she just brought the joy to the equation. So that's the most magical thing that I have for you. Just make sure you send that joy into the camera.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. I'm going to share some additional information here if you'd like more details from SagePresence. If you have any questions following this, feel free to reach out. Be able to share any questions you have. Also, our website, sagepresence.com, is a list of resources and some replays of other webinars we've done, particularly one with the selection committee insight that you can find valuable. But we'll toss it back to you, Bryson, and thanks so much for this opportunity.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much, Dean. This presentation is so timely. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. TriNet recently partnered with Harris Flash Polls, and one of the key findings was that 75% of businesses say that remote working has been challenging, and the survey found that 40% of businesses have purchased or upgraded video conferencing licenses within the past 2 months, and now we know how to use it more effectively. So thank you for that. It was great. I will close with this. I've spent hours with labor law attorneys in the past several weeks to understand the tax law changes that are part of the federal response. So if anyone on the call needs assistance with the CARES Act, the PPP program, or the tax credits and deferrals that you may be entitled to, make sure to connect with the person that invited you today, and we'll be happy to help. So Dean, Troy, thanks again so much, and we'll close the seminar.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, everyone.
Great talking with y'all.